Hi, I'm Glenn Rogers, and this is American Perspectives. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment, to infringe or not to infringe. Sometimes you'll see an abbreviation. It says 2A. That's the way people who spend a lot of time thinking and talking about the Second Amendment abbreviate it. So when you see something like the actual title of this video, 2A, to infringe or not to infringe, that means the Second Amendment. What exactly does the Second Amendment say? What it says is simple. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, what exactly does that mean? A well-regulated militia and the right to keep and bear arms. Those are all important ideas that we need to talk about, and we're going to do that in just a moment. But first, I want to take a minute to ask you to help me out a bit. It would be very helpful to this channel if you would subscribe. And so down below, over to the right a little bit is a subscribe button. If you would click that, it would be really helpful. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't obligate you to anything. All it does basically is tell YouTube that you like the content of this channel, and that allows our videos to move up through their algorithm so that more people have a chance to see the videos. It's also helpful if you hit the little thumbs up button. That's a way to say I like this video. And if you share this video, there's a button you can click to share and send it to other media platforms and that sort of thing. And that would all be very helpful. You can also leave comments down below. But the most important thing is if you would hit that subscribe button, that would be really, really helpful to us, and we would appreciate that. Okay, so the Second Amendment. What does this really mean? To understand it thoroughly, a little bit of history is very helpful. You know, when I was in high school and we were studying American history, I remember hearing things about the Boston Tea Party, and you would hear the phrase, no taxation without representation, things like that. And those were the ideas that they taught us in relationship to the Revolutionary War, why we had it, and all that sort of thing. As I got older and began studying on my own about American history and the founding of our nation and things like that, one of the things I discovered was that one of the main issues that got America into the war, where America said, okay, enough of this, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, and if we have to go to war to fix this, we will. One of the main things was that the British tried to disarm the American colonists. And I thought, when I discovered that, I thought, well, why don't I remember that from high school? How come that wasn't part of what they taught us? Didn't hear it in college either, okay? I had to find this out on my own. And basically what was happening was the American colonies were kind of like the ugly stepchildren, and the British citizens didn't care much about them, and the government didn't want to hear about them. They just wanted whatever wealth they could get from America, but they weren't interested in treating Americans very well. And that didn't sit well with a lot of Americans, and so they were getting kind of riled up, and the few British troops that were here, they tried to intervene in what Americans were doing, and there were some skirmishes, and some British soldiers got killed, and so did some American citizens, but there were some very minor skirmishes here and there. And when news of that got back to England, it really kind of annoyed them, and I can understand that. They didn't want their soldiers being shot down. And so they decided they would send a bunch of troops over here and disarm these problematic Americans. Who did they think they were? These colonists, to stand up against the British military. So they sent boatload after boatload after boatload of British soldiers and strategically placed them throughout the colonies, armed soldiers walking up and down the streets, and they were attempting to disarm the Americans. Well, for many of the Americans, that was just too much. I mean, there were other problems. They weren't getting proper representation in Parliament. They weren't being heard. Things weren't getting any better. But when the British showed up with their rifles in large number, trying to control the Americans and to take their arms, to disarm the Americans, then they said, okay, that's enough. And the Revolutionary War was the result. A big part of it was them trying to disarm American, I'll use the word citizens. They were colonists of Great Britain at the time, but let's just go ahead and call them citizens of America. They didn't want to be disarmed, and they were ready to fight, and they did. And the end result, we know, was that group of American colonists defeated the most powerful army in the world. And after the war, when it came time to declare our rights, for the government to articulate the rights that American citizens had and to put it in writing, the Second Amendment that they put in there was the right to keep and bear arms. That was extremely important. The first one had to do with several things: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, free press, and that sort of thing. And the very next one was the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. Now, why did they feel that we needed to have weapons of war, okay? Why did they feel we needed to have those? Well, in that time, people weren't really comfortable with the idea of having a standing army. It made them a little nervous. They had just had a huge standing army, come over there with their guns and their weapons and everything, and that was the British Army, and they didn't want that to happen again, even if it was an American army. So they weren't comfortable with the idea of a standing army, and so they wanted what is called a citizens' militia. And what that meant, basically, was that every man in the country between the ages of 18 and 45 was required, not just allowed, but was required to have the weapons that he needed to go to war should that become necessary. So he had to have a working rifle and a pistol and plenty of black powder, and he had to have lead so that they could make into ammunition, and they had to be ready to muster and fight at a moment's notice. And that is what they called a well-regulated militia. It was basically a citizen's army with an I'm ready to go mentality. They were armed and they were ready to go. Now, a lot of people look at that and they'll say, well, see, right at the very first part of it, it says, we have to be able to protect our nation, so we need a well-regulated militia. Well, that means, and then they start talking about something that is basically the National Guard. They're talking about meeting once a month and having a uniform and having drills and practices and all of this sort of thing. And that would be a well-regulated militia. And we don't need that anymore because we have a National Guard and we have a standing army, so we don't need a citizens' army. And so this whole thing is, outdated, and it needs to be repealed and taken away. But there's a problem with that, because the whole idea of the Second Amendment did include a citizens' militia in case there needed to be an army to defend the nation. But if you read carefully what the Founding Fathers had to say, what they were concerned about, and what they wanted to have a citizens' militia for, was that there were two kinds of threats to America. One was a threat from the outside, and today we might think of China or Russia or Iran or something like that, someone who might try to invade our country, and we need to have a strong military force to protect us from that. And the Founding Fathers understood that as well. They knew there was a threat of invasion from without or outside the nation. But they also understood given human nature and given the desire for power and control, that there was also a threat from within, and that was a real threat. And part of what they had in mind with the citizens' militia were individual citizens who could come together to fight and to defend society, not just from a threat from outside, but also from a threat within. Somebody who got control of the government and started denying people their rights and changing things and creating problems in the country, and they knew that there would need to be a way for citizens to respond to that and say, no, wait a second, fellas, wait a minute. We're not having any of this, okay? We have rights, and you cannot deny us our rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they understood that there was a threat from within, and a citizens' army was important. People needed to be armed. People needed to be able to fight if it came to it. Now, nobody wants it to come to that. The founding fathers didn't, and there are all sorts of things set up in there so that we can vote people into office, people out of office, we can replace people, we can control what's happening. And as long as that balance of power exists, then there's no need for a citizens' army to do anything. But what if something developed? And if you're a movie buff and you watch many futuristic TV shows or movies or things like that, you see all the time a storyline where somebody gains too much power and they control the military and terrible things happen, and suddenly the world isn't what it used to be. And people need to be armed. They need to have a way to defend themselves. And then there's also just the plain old ordinary everyday issue about crime, defending yourself against a crime that occurs. And so people have a right to keep and bear arms because they need that. That's necessary. Someone says, oh, we don't need that. We have a police force. You ever called the police when there was an emergency? How many minutes does it take for them to get there? Do you know how bad somebody can hurt other people? How many people can die in 2 or 3 minutes? The time it takes police to respond? Now, police are busy. I'm not anti-police. I'm very pro-police. I love the police. I've had lots of friends over my life that were police at every level. I know police officers now. And I have a great deal of respect for the police. But when they're out doing what they do and a call comes in, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 minutes to get where they need to be. You know what a criminal can do in 2 or 3 minutes? People have to be able to protect themselves. And government that says, no, you don't, we will protect you, that's just not the case. They can't, because police can't be everywhere they need to be all the time. Citizens need to be able to protect themselves. So the Second Amendment says you have the right to keep and bear arms. What does that mean? Well, to keep means to own or to have, and to bear means to carry. Citizens have the right to own and carry weapons. That's what it means. Okay? You don't have to be a constitutional specialist or a lawyer to figure out what this means. It's just simple language. Read it, and you can know what it means. How do we know, though, if we wanted extra proof, how do we know that this idea of self-defense is part of the larger meaning of the Second Amendment? Well, because the founders took what existed in the English government and carried it over into our government. Whether you realize that or not, that's what happened. So in 1689, the English Bill of Rights was written and put into effect in England, and one of the rights that English people had was the right to keep and bear arms, and that included the right to defend oneself. Okay, self-defense was part of it, and it's that. I mean, even the language is the same. The right to keep and bear arms is carried over from the British Bill of Rights into the English Bill of Rights. And so we know that that's what they had in mind. Some people argue, well, this is just for hunting. It means you're allowed to have a rifle or a shotgun for hunting, and that's all. And, that means having, 3 rounds in your gun. And that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't mean that. And that's not what the right is about. So don't believe that when they tell you, well, that just has to do with hunting. It doesn't just have to do with hunting, okay? And even though the Second Amendment doesn't specifically explain all that it covers, you have to understand that none of the rights in the First Amendment, the Second, the Third, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth, all through the whole big list, none of them are actually explained, where after the right is articulated, it says, now, let us explain what this means. This means this and that and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't do that. Okay, none of them do that. So you can't expect the Second Amendment to have that, or any of the rights that are specified in the First Amendment. Just read them, and it means what it says. And it doesn't take an awful lot of interpretation to understand what it means when it says you have the right to keep and bear arms. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what it says. So you have the right, period. You have the right. Now, you've probably heard some people say, well, we can't have weapons of war on our streets. In fact, our vice president is fond of saying that, and she said that a couple of times. We can't have weapons of war on our streets. That's just silly. I can't come up with a better, well, no, I can't come up with a better word, but my wife doesn't like me to say that too often. So I'll just use the word silly instead of dumb or stupid. It's just silly, okay? In 1792, when the Bill of Rights was signed, and they were talking about you have the right to keep and bear arms, what kind of weapons were they talking about? They were talking about the very weapons that these same people had taken into war during the Revolutionary War to defeat the British. They were talking about their rifles and their pistols and their knives and their axes and their tomahawk and everything. Those were the weapons that they had a right to keep and bear, and those were weapons of war. And interestingly enough, if you know anything about weapons and guns, any gun can in fact be a weapon of war, and the kinds of guns that we have today are evolved weapons that we have actually taken and used in war as weapons of war, okay? And if you look at a soldier today and how a soldier is armed with his rifle and his handgun, those look very similar to what we can buy. The main difference is they have an automatic rifle, and citizens don't usually have the ability to get their hands on an automatic. They have a semi-automatic weapon. But these can be weapons of war. Of course they can. But the typical person who owns guns and utilizes guns for self-defense do not use them in a way that is problematic. A few criminals do, but most people who own guns are respectable, law-abiding citizens who don't use them inappropriately. In 2020, more people than ever before bought guns. It was the largest number of new gun purchases ever in history, and the ammo to go with them. And in fact, if you go into a gun store today, you'll see a shortage of both weapons and ammunition because so many people went out and bought guns. 40% of Americans either own a gun or live in a house, live with somebody who does own a gun. And that's over 72 million people. The number of guns in the United States overall is estimated to be at about 400 million guns. Now, that's more guns than there are people, okay? There's a lot of guns in America. There's no question about that. It's a lot of guns. Some households have one. Some have a dozen. There are people who are collectors that have a couple hundred guns, okay, and ammunition for them. But mostly people are going to have 2 or 3 guns, and that's what they'll have, maybe a handgun and a rifle or a shotgun or something like that. The number of guns we have in America scares some people. And mostly those people don't know anything about guns, and just the whole idea of guns is scary to them. They think guns are dangerous. Guns are not dangerous. A gun is just a hunk of metal with some holes drilled in it and a little mechanism inside to make it work. The gun itself isn't dangerous. If you take a gun and lay it on the table right there, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to fire. Guns don't fire by themselves. They don't just mysteriously go off. Only people who say that are people who have absolutely no clue how guns work. They don't know what they're talking about. Guns don't just automatically or somehow mysteriously go off. Okay, you lay that gun out there, the only thing that's going to happen is if it lays there long enough, it's going to get dusty. It could lay there a week, it could lay there a month, a year, it could lay there 100 years. It wouldn't do anything but get dusty. Guns don't just go off by themselves and hurt people any more than if you took a butcher knife from your kitchen and laid it there, it would somehow magically get up and cut somebody or stab somebody. It's an inanimate object. It isn't dangerous. It's the hands of the person that it's in that make it dangerous. If they don't know what they're doing, if they don't use it properly, or if they're a bad person and they use it for evil intent, then it's the person who's dangerous. It's not the thing in their hand. And it doesn't matter if it's a gun or a knife or a baseball bat or a golf club or a screwdriver or a saw or a drill or a rock. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's not the inanimate object that just lays there until somebody picks it up to use it. It's the person who picks it up to use it. That's where the problem is, you see. And there's plenty of data that shows that having a lot of guns in the country is not a problem. In fact, it's just the other way around. There are people who've done actual real research, and one of them is this guy right here, Dr. John Lott of UCLA. And this is, you can see how big this book is. This is a big book. He has done extensive research all across the country, county by county by county throughout all of the states. And what the research indicates is that in the counties where they issue a permit to carry a concealed weapon to qualified people, that is, people who can pass a background check and who've had a class, the more of those permits that are issued, the crime rate goes down. As the number of guns being carried goes up, the crime rate goes down proportionately, okay? Guns are not bad things. Bad people with guns can do bad things, and a gun in the hands of a bad person can be hurtful. But that's no different, like I said, than a hammer or a knife or a baseball bat or anything else. And a gun in the hands of a good person who can stop a crime from being committed doesn't make us less safe. It makes us more safe. We have the right to keep and bear arms, and nobody can take that right from us. It's part of the Constitution, part of the Bill of Rights. And if you live in a state where your gun rights are being infringed, if they're being threatened, then like I've said on other occasions, you need to write your representatives, state and federal. You need to write them and tell them that they need to protect your gun rights. Now, if this is something that you'd like to know more about, I have a much smaller book than the one written by Dr. Lott, and this is called The Truth About Guns. This is available through Barnes & Noble or Amazon, whatever. You can get it as an ebook as well as a paperback book, and this will give you a lot of the information that you need if you want to understand this issue about gun rights in America. Well, Well, that's our video for the day. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, let me encourage you, if you haven't yet, to go down and hit the subscribe button. It would be very helpful to us. Maybe hit the thumbs up button as well. You can share this video in other forms of media if you click on share, and you can leave comments in the comments section. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll watch more of our videos. Thanks.